Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Dr. Giselle Foss and I have Ashley Cappaletty with me today. Two guests here today, and there's a really interesting story about why we're all three here today. And this is the first time we're all meeting on a podcast together. The story is that I had been connecting with Ashley, and she and I have been um, sort of peripherally co-creating, getting closer to co-creating for quite some time and having interesting conversations. And we were, just had a meeting recently to look at how we're going to co-create and work together. And she wrote to me and said, "Hey, Sama, have you ever had a podcast about how spinal injuries might influence womb wellness and fertility and all of that?" And I said, that's a really great topic. And I haven't had one, but she and I had talked about it a little bit already. And I said, well, I think I need to do one. And she said, well, why don't I come on the show and we'll do it. So we scheduled a time for today, the day that we're recording this. But then I looked at the rest of the schedule and realized that I had Dr. Foss on the schedule, who happens to be a chiropractor who focuses on womb wellness on the very same day that Ashley and I were planning on having this conversation. So I wrote to both of them and said, hey, it seems like we all three need to get on this podcast together and have this conversation. So here we are. So Dr. Giselle, I would love for you to start out by introducing yourself and sharing about your womb wellness journey and how womb wellness has become central in your professional as well as personal. We always kind of try and start with the personal story of, because most wellness professionals started their profession with their own personal journey of some sort and of healing, right? And then that inspires you to become a professional and help others with similar healing processes. So if you can share a little bit about that, and then we'll have Ashley, you can introduce yourself after her, and we'll just get into a conversation about this topic. How's that sound?
Absolutely. So thank you guys so much for having me. I'm Dr. Giselle Foss. I'm a chiropractic physician, a woman's work facilitator, an experienced 500-hour yoga teacher, an acupuncture student, and I also like to call myself a cyclic lifestyle coach. Um, yes, I treat patients as a chiropractor 3 days a week, but my own business is I help women fall in love with menstruation and the entirety of the menstrual cycle. So, knowing that we have phases every single week of the month that we're different and loving ourselves exactly as we are in all of those phases. And that is where the magic and stepping into my feminine energy really shifted, was when I embraced that I change every week. And I love that about myself. And it's something that we're not taught. So my story goes is growing up from, I got my period for the first time when I was 14. And from the first period, it was horrible. I had horrible cramping, horrible clotting. I would miss a week of school every single month from the time I was in middle school. Um, and so I went to my OBGYN, and it was a male, and he was like, "Oh, pretty much your only option is to go on birth control." Like so many women that I work with, and I know that's all Western medicine knows most times, most times. So trusting him, I did. I went on the pill at 14, and it wasn't really touching the pain. And so he kept increasing my dosage, increasing my dosage, increasing my dosage, until by the time I was like 15, 16, I was on 3 times the normal amount of birth control that a woman is supposed to be on. And my mood swings were horrible. My depression was horrible. I would go back to my doctor and say, I think my mental health is deteriorating because of the pill. And he'd be like, no, 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 no. Like, you need to be on antidepressants. The pill doesn't do this. Again, I hear this so often with the women I work with, and they end up being on a cocktail of medications from things that were brought about from being on synthetic hormones. So when I was 21, I woke up one day and I had this call to come off the pill. Like, no, I didn't do any research into it. No one had tried to convince me. I just woke up and was like, I'm like done. Like, I don't know why, I'm just done. So pulled the pill cold turkey, no guidance. And this is when things started getting really weird, because most people don't tell you that when you come off of the pill, everything gets worse because your brain no longer knows how to talk to your womb. So, like pulling the pill, your body's like, whoa, 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 I don't know how to make hormones anymore. I don't know how to ovulate. I don't know how to cycle in this natural way that my body knows how. So, my period was worse than it started. So I was really hopeless. I went back to him and he was like, well, that's normal for coming off the pill. You need to go back on to re-regulate it. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. So by this point, I'm starting chiropractic school, and I ran into this boy that I really liked. He was also in chiropractic school, and he was an acupuncture student, and he found me like doubled over in my dorm room with insane cramps. And he asked what was wrong. I told him I had cramps. It was normal. I get sick all the time when I get my period. And he was like, I can fix this with acupuncture and Chinese medicine. That man is now my husband. And he specializes in Chinese medicine for fertility and women's health and menstrual cramps. And we collab sometimes. Like, if my clients need a little plant support, I definitely send that way. And if his clients need more of like a spiritual coaching womb support, he sends them my way, which is really beautiful. So I was working with Chinese medicine for 2 years, and I saw amazing results, but I felt like I plateaued, right? Like, I reached this point where if I stopped getting treatment consistently or stopped working with the plants, the symptoms would just re-arise. And that's when I dove into womb work, and everything melted into place and shifted when I met my body with acceptance and understanding at each and every phase. No matter how I was feeling, I just honored it. And I started working from my womb space. And that is when my periods became my favorite time of the month, because I could actually enjoy the magic that bleeding has instead of being in so much pain.
Giselle, thank you so much for such a beautiful story. I mean, that part where that man is now your husband. I mean, that's like the ultimate climax of this story. I mean, the way you said it was so clear. Like, I can fix that. I mean, if any man came and said, I can fix your, and then managed to do it, I'd marry him too. And I have a husband.
Yeah, and he's a beautiful person. He has this long blonde hair. He's a hippie man. He's very rooted in his divine masculine and supporting the feminine, which I love about him and the work I do. Obviously he's not perfect. I'm not perfect, but we really support each other beautifully, which is great.
It's such a
That's
great
a rare thing.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I was going to say, that's a rare and beautiful thing. Goals, yeah. Right there. That's all I have to say. Goals.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we both say that we think we were cosmically put together for a greater purpose, for sure. So we definitely are sacred mirrors of each other. So at times it gets intense and triggering, but the love is always there. And that's what weaves us back together when things get intense, which is really beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So before we get into the topic that we came together to discuss, perhaps, Ashley, you could introduce yourself a little bit more too, and perhaps tell a little bit of the story leading up to this big question about spinal injury and fertility and womb wellness.
Well, it's interesting because I actually met with somebody earlier today to work out something that is off topic but connected, because it sort of triggered me getting into this, and I'll get into that. So my name's Ashley Cappaletty. I got into, my profession was clinical psychology and art therapy, which is what I went to school and I studied on a bachelor's degree level. That's what I went to school for. Then I graduated, and once I graduated, I've been struggling financially to get stable. And at one point in time, I was with somebody for several years. And a month before a major incident had happened between us, I found out I was pregnant by a local psychic who I had never met up until that day before. And I was like, okay, I didn't believe her at the time, but a month later, when all this stuff had happened, my fiance at the time was diving into QAnon very, very heavily. And he was spending hours and hours and hours consuming conspiracy theories. And it was stressing me out badly. And we ended up getting into an altercation, and I miscarried my child. And so he flushed the fetus down the toilet, and then he ended up having a mental break. And it was after this incident with this specifically that caused me to dig even deeper than I already had. Because at the time I found out I have an L4, L5 injury in my spine. And it was causing me to have lapses in my bowel movements. I was having problems moving around. They gave me steroid injections that only works temporarily, and then I found out later on you can only get so many a year. So it was literally a band-aid on a gaping wound. So so between my spinal injury and then the miscarriage and all this added stress with the QAnon stuff, it ended very, very bad. And so fast forward to now, and I was talking to Sama about my spinal cord injury, because I was kind of curious as to whether or not a spinal cord injury could prevent or affect womb wellness or fertility in general. Because I was told that my mom actually went through a major surgery in her spine because her one of her discs, as a result of tremendous abuse, was split in half. So she ended up having to go in, and they opened up her back, and she has hardware in her back. And now she's permanently disabled. They wanted me to do that at 30 years old. And I said, I'm too young. No, I'm not trying to have invasive surgery on my spine. There's got to be another way for this. And I wasn't ready to accept those kinds of circumstances for myself. And then today I got with Marshall Butcher in regards to creating a program to help those who have been involved with QAnon, to help their families be deprogrammed from this overall cult, because this is what it is. It's become a cult nationwide. And people don't want to believe that, but there are groups and people dedicated to supporting the people who have lost family members to this. And it's all coming back, it's all coming full circle. So today is full of answers and solutions. So this is my work.
Wow, Ashley, thank you so much. So much involved in what you're sharing about. And so I'm curious, can you just clarify for us, how long ago was it that this whole altercation with the fiance, the miscarriage, the involvement?
That happened in 2016 specifically for me.
Happened in 2016. So QAnon was happening in 2016 already.
This was long before. I think that was when Trump first got elected.
Mm-hmm.
But this was going on even before it became a huge coup in Washington. Before, it's only been in the last couple of years it's gained tremendous momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it, based on my research and what I've been talking to Marshall about, it's being exacerbated right now because of coronavirus, because of the dark journalism.
Mm-hmm.
There's just it's right now we're in a cesspool and a breeding ground for them to just gain momentum. And there are also people who are currently using this QAnon thing to build their businesses.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And people are losing their family members.
Mm-hmm. So you had this experience early on before it was so big of losing
Mm-hmm.
a family member, having this kind of difficult, emotional, quite dramatic and physically taxing experience. Now, do you know when this spinal injury happened? Like, was there an
From
accident or a fall or some kind of physical trauma?
It's been a result of, I would say, a combination of several things. When I was younger, I went through a lot of physical abuse with my mom. I had to protect her and my younger brothers for being killed by their dad, who was a drunk and alcoholic and who would do crazy things
Mhm.
while he was going through the works of being self-destructive. That's the
Right.
best way to put it.
Mhm.
And then later on, I got into a car accident, and then the year before I had my miscarriage, I slipped and fell on ice. So it's just been injury after injury after injury that just hasn't helped.
Right. And you had never had any kind of body-centered therapies after those, certainly probably not when you were growing
I
up.
didn't even know any of that kind of thing existed until recently.
Okay. And then was that the only time that you were pregnant? Was when you had that
Um,
miscarriage?
I had another miscarriage about 6 months later, and it was stressful circumstances, and it's usually stress that I find that usually causes
Mhm.
people to lose their children. Because I've talked to other people who have had miscarriages afterwards, just because I was curious about their experiences, and it's usually something that's stress induced.
Yeah. And it can be just the stress, but it also sounds like, and I'd love to hear from you, Giselle, about how all of these physical trauma injuries that you had that never had the kind of body-centered healing that was needed to recover from and fully heal, uh, you know, and then on top of that
Just
is all the emotional stress and trauma that's also going on. I'd love to hear and you have something else to add before Giselle shares her take on it all?
Yeah, just so she's clear and she knows, I did go to physical therapy, which did help. And I have learned in recent years that oxygen intake makes every bit of difference too. So I've also been working on that as well. So these are just recent things that they don't tell us in health class in public school.
Right.
So
So,
that being said, I just wanted to put that out there because I know that those play a part in it too.
so you've been
Yeah.
doing deep breathing practices for greater oxygen intake. Is that what you've been doing?
I have been working with a product that a friend of mine gave me. It's called LIPH, LIPH, and
Uh-huh.
it's supposed to help bring up the alkalization and oxygen intake in the body and in the cells.
Okay. All right, great. So yeah, Giselle, over to you. Here you have this person saying, these are all the impacts on my fertility. What
Yeah.
would you have to offer someone like this and for this question?
Absolutely. So I have three brains, right? I have my Western chiropractic science brain, I have my theory Chinese medicine brain, and I have my spiritual priestess brain, like all going on in here. Um, so I guess starting with my Western brain, The nerves that supply the uterus, it's kind of a sympathetic group of nerves called the inferior hypogastric plexus, and those are the nerves that supply the uterus, and those are from levels T10, which is the 10th vertebrae in your thoracic spine, to L1, which is the first vertebrae in your lumbar spine. And by that I mean is those nerves come out of those levels and kind of go to your uterus to supply it with those nerves. Because you had mentioned your disc injury was at a lower level, I'm not worried about the nerve impact on your womb, which is good. That's a good thing. What my brain does do, though, is it switches to my Chinese medicine brain, and I'm immediately thinking stagnation and stasis. So I'm thinking that because of injuries, there is scar tissue, there are adhesions, um, there are things that are stuck and stagnant, so you don't have free flow of chi, or right, our energy or life force going through our body and connecting to your womb to warm her and move things and move up and down the meridians that are so important for conception and womb work, which that's where my mind goes to. And then on top of that, you hold a lot of trauma in our womb space, of where we hold it all. And I notice from a lot of the women that I work with and experience, and from my own navigations of my life and coming to terms with things that happened, is when we don't tune in to our emotional trauma, it creates more stagnation, more gunk, worse period cramps, more clots, more pain, more irregular cycles. And so it takes a lot of bravery to kind of step up and be like, I am going to work with someone, whether it be a coach, someone who's trained in somatic experiencing and trauma, a therapist, whoever that may be, to be like, I am going to deal with these things that have happened in my life from a womb centered way. And on top of that, also do body centered work, whether that's like going to a chiropractor. If you were my patient, I would probably really focus on doing a lot of soft tissue in that area, moving the adhesions and the scar tissue, making sure your pelvis is in line, because when your spine has an injury, most likely your pelvis is kind of not equal. And we want a nice equal pelvis to support your womb that sits inside of our cauldron of our pelvis. And I would also like to see you in acupuncture to help really move your chi and focusing on working the chi through those conception meridians that are so important, like our liver channel, our spleen channel, our Ren channel, making sure things are moving and addressing the old stuck stuff that has happened from old injuries, physical and emotional. That all plays a role.
Mhm. Yeah, I love how you describe it with all these three brains coming into play. And I just wanted to uh, sort of flesh out, if you will, if you don't mind the pun a little bit, this relationship between trauma and stagnation. And I'll share a little bit about that from my perspective too, because trauma recovery, body-centered trauma recovery has been a big focus of mine in my work. I didn't really tell my stories, but I have, loads of more emotional than physical trauma throughout my early childhood and my adulthood as well. The wildfires in the last 5 or so years, the county that I live in, over half of the county has burned down from wildfires in the last 5 years, and I've been evacuated every single year for at least a week or more. And we recently had to move house because previous landlord's house burnt down in the last year's wildfires, and they were going to sell our apartment. So we ended up buying a house because that was easier than renting a house, actually, funny enough.
Yeah.
How that is, I don't know how that got to that place, but it is the case. So for me, that healing from the emotional trauma, and I can only imagine how physical traumas on top of that would exacerbate it. But what happens when we're traumatized, when we've had trauma that we haven't had the space and the support to really resolve in the body, is oftentimes the body goes into freeze mode, or the body stays in trauma response mode for a long time in some way, whether it's fight or flight mode, because that fighting, flight, running away energy never got discharged. The body's still trying to get us to run away and putting all of the blood flow and energy into the limbs, and a lot of muscle tension in the limbs. And there's an instinct to curl the body up into a ball, which creates tension in the psoas muscles, which are the muscles that go from the low spine up to the thoracic spine, to that same area. And that tension can create squishing action between the vertebra and the nerves that innervate the womb. Even if you don't have disc injury in there, that tension in that constant wanting to curl up into a ball instinct that's 10 times stronger in female bodied people that have an actual uterus than it is for people who don't have a uterus. It's an instinct of self-defense to protect specifically the womb. And so every time we have a stressful, traumatic circumstance, whether it's emotional or physical, that instinct is there, and we oftentimes don't allow that curling up into a ball, and so it just builds up as tension in the psoas. And I can speak from personal experience of having the psoas finally just shut itself off because of chronic tension, and then that destabilizes the whole skeletal system, causing tension patterns all throughout the whole rest of the body, where this nerve is being squeezed and that nerve is being squeezed, and it's not being pinched so much that you have pain, but it's diminishing the innervation and the blood flow and the flow of nutrients and fluids and all of that. When you have those chronic, when you have a muscle or a system of muscular skeletal structure that's chronically tense, that squeezing reduces the amount of blood flow that comes to that area, reduces the amount of energy that can flow in that area. And it basically shuts everything down. And also when we're in fight and flight mode, our organs are deliberately shut down. Are the ones that aren't the digestion organs, like the liver and the spleen and the intestines and all of those organs, like lend their energy. They kind of go down to half mast, if you will, and lend their energy to the heart muscle and the muscle and the muscles in the lungs to be able to run away and fight. And most of us are living in fight and flight mode all the time. Plus,
Can I bring up another phase of trauma that hasn't been brought up that I've noticed a lot of people who are susceptible to the QAnon suggestions go through? You mentioned fight, flight, and freezing. There's a fourth one, fawning.
There is that fourth one, fawning. And I'm curious how you would say that shows up in the body to shut things down, like we're talking about, because I'm kind of seeing that, and we could make that connection right here in this conversation.
Okay, so fawning, typically what people do is they keep the peace in order for them to survive. They figure if they keep the peace and keep things status quo, which is what you see a lot of people do who are part of cults, they keep everything in place so that way they don't get abused. That's how they maintain status quo. Mm-hmm. That's how people maintain power structures. That's how people who dominate and control seize power. In essence, it's through traumatizing someone so much psychologically that they just bow down and cower before you so that they don't become a target.
And so what that does, that in order to fawn, it means you have to set aside your own emotional reactions and your own physical and emotional needs and prioritize someone else's preferences and desires and needs to make sure that they are appeased, because an abuser or a dominator is dangerous if they, have a particular emotional reaction. So everything comes away in the fawner. All of their attention is steered away from their own inner needs. And I speak from my personal experience too, because I've been in relationships like that. So it's no longer about listening to my own needs and for nourishment or care or anything like that, or expressing my own emotions, processing my own emotions, having time for my own self. It all becomes all about making sure that that abuser, that dominator is happy with me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
It's all, it no longer is about you and what you need. They demand and are entitled to every ounce of you, including your womb space.
everything, right? And so that, in order for that to occur, there's a subjugation and a suppression, and which naturally produces a stagnation in all of those systems. It's like everything has to shut down, and all of that energy is channeled towards making sure everything's flowing and good for the abuser.
Absolutely. And I think all women, even if they're not in a situation like yours, Ashley, have a little piece of fawning in them, right? And I see it with the women I work with, where you have to teach them to be sovereign, right? And
Yes.
I feel like there's always that piece of like, oh, like I want to be normal and like all the other girls. And there's that suppression of like freedom of who you really are, of your autonomy, of your sovereignty. And that totally affects the womb space, and also just exaggerates like the sister wound that we all have. It's almost like a competition to be the most status quo, right? To fawn the most so that we fit in,
Yes.
creating all of these period irregularities, all of these fertility struggles that so many women have, all of these painful periods and clots. It all comes together for sure.
So this conversation about that started out as like, okay, how can a spinal injury affect our womb wellness, has blossomed out to include all the different things that may lead up to a spinal injury, or all these different events that you listed, Ashley, in your experience of childhood abuse, which by itself could produce any of these things if unaddressed and unresolved. Um, Abusive relationship patterns,
Yep.
right? And car accident, right? And then
Yep.
there's the list is for one person, that's a pretty substantial list. But any one of those in one person could be really contributing to the kind of stagnation and that we're talking about. And so Giselle, maybe, and perhaps we can all share some of the things that we've discovered that helps to get that stagnation loosened up and flowing again. You talked about warmth. You talked
Yeah.
about, circulation of energies. I know that you talked about how acupuncture can do that, but I know that it's not just acupuncture alone. And I'm
No.
sure any good acupuncturist, any good chiropractor is also talking to their people about lifestyle choices, because that's another thing. Even without the severe abuse situations, childhood abuse, accident, traumatic physical injury, emotional injury from abusive situations, even without that, the basic lifestyle of the typical modern day woman creates stagnation with
Absolutely.
the foods that we're eating, with the type of physical things that we're doing in our lives, sitting in chairs, driving in cars, things like that, that constrict, that we're sitting on the pelvis all the time in certain ways, in certain body positions. And so there's all these lifestyle choices that are exacerbating the stagnation. So can you share a little bit about some of the lifestyle things that you talk, and also this like sanction against recognizing the menstrual cycle as something of importance in our lives, like trying to sweep it under the rug, right? That whole thing is traumatizing to us as well. So could you share a little bit about, perhaps from your personal journey of like discovering, oh wow, well if I just do this and if I just do that, then it helps to free up that stagnation.
As you're like asking me these things, I'm like feel so much excitement like bubbling up, because this is my passion, is giving women or bleeding people these tools to live a life of feeling like luscious and embodied in being a cyclic person, in knowing that we are not met, right? We are built in a circle. Our hormones ebb and flow over and over again. And we have to meet our bodies in that way with our food choices, with the way we move our bodies, with the way we honor our emotions. And I actually just wrote a blog post a few days ago about how even in a relationship, our needs as bleeding people are different in each phase, right? At least for me, in my follicular phase, I'm like, okay, get off me, I'm working. But when I'm in like my deep luteal phase, pre-bleed, I'm like, okay, I want to be like cuddled and loved, and like I want you to bring me tea and like nurture me. So for me, a lot of what you're saying and a lot of what I teach my clients is that piece of sovereignty. I think it has a lot, clearing up stagnation has a lot to do with getting your needs clear, of your needs as a human, your needs during different phases, your boundaries clear, and either meeting them yourself or asking for help when help is needed for others to meet them. Because so many of us who hold trauma in our wombs and in our bodies have never had our true needs met. So we're always in that like constricted psoas type position that you were talking about, because we're always expecting the worst. We're expecting that trauma, we're expecting the rejection. So I think a lot of the stagnation has to be like, oh, maybe I feel so stressed and anxious at this point of my cycle because I need a little extra help with this, but I never ask for it because I don't recognize it's there. And in addition to that, I'm really big on seasons and phases, and how we need to nourish our bodies differently in each phase of our cycle to support the free flow of chi and avoid that stagnation of energy. Like during the different phases of our cycle, we should be exercising differently, we should be eating differently, we should be resting differently. And I always tell people that we are a microcosm living within a macrocosm. So right now we are in the spring, right? Spring amplifies stagnation. So if you're noticing that you have a little bit more pain in the spring, maybe you have more clots when you bleed in the spring, maybe your cramps are worse, maybe your PMS is worse, or your breast tenderness. Well, yes, I'm understanding that maybe this past month I had more stagnation than the month before, and I look back on my needs and my boundaries and my lifestyle, and how does that reflect? But also remembering I am in the spring of our Mother Earth, and that amplifies it. And being able to meet myself and my needs with tender understanding for where I'm at, and knowing that I'm safe and that there's nothing wrong with me. For me, that was the key. That was the light bulb to unlocking my potential as a person who cycles.
Mm. And Ashley,
It
I saw you go ooh and put your finger in the air. What were you thinking right then?
I didn't want to interrupt her. I can't remember what it is that I was going to say. That's why I have a bad habit of interrupting people, but I kept it quiet.
I think it was right before you were talking about, Giselle was talking about eating differently for the phases of the cycle and exercising differently. It was right before that that I saw your finger.
One of the things that I've noticed in regards to that. Not only are we not taught these things, but it's been getting down to tracking things. And I haven't started tracking my period until recently, until the last several years. I didn't even learn about any of this stuff until I went into a marriage and theology class where they were talking about natural family planning. And I was, what is that? And so I did this investigation. So there was some parts of the natural family planning that resonated, which was tracking your period and understanding your cycles. But in the natural family planning, they didn't go very deep. So in more research, when I found out about, there was this woman who does something called In Your Flow. And she actually has this app. And she coaches about the different phases and stuff like that, but she charges a lot of money. And I'm like, that's not practical for people who are poor, which is what I am. So, I mean, it's great that these programs exist, but if they're not accessible to everybody, what's the point? That's a lot of times what the struggle is people who are poor do not have the money to go to doctors. They don't have access to this because they don't have the money.
Mhm. And that goes for chiropractic and acupuncture and all that. Although acupuncturists will often have community clinics, which makes it more accessible. But if that $20 for the acupuncture clinic is already taken up by feeding your family for the week or the month, then that's not even very accessible. And this topic is one that's very near and dear to my heart, especially for us wellness professionals to consider, is that, you know, only if we only are helping a certain economic segment of society to find liberation, that's not true liberation.
No, it's not.
Because if it's at the cost of another segment of society that cannot access that liberation, and every segment of society is interconnected and depends upon each other, and you know, those who do have access to, you know, expensive programs, if we're not also supporting those who do not, then you know, there's some trouble, there's some problems there that's probably a topic for another episode that you brought up here at the end, Ashley. So
sorry.
there's often we need to have a part 2 conversation, and possibly bring in another expert about how can we create a healthier economic models that include caring for each other, including.
I would love to be in on that conversation.
Okay, well, we shall see who comes along. This is a very passionate topic of mine. So, but we are getting to the top of our hour here to complete our conversation this time. Thank you both so much for bringing your insights and your questions and your passion for healing and for supporting each other on this healing journey. Giselle, if anybody wanted to connect with you about learning more about what you do, how might they do so?
Yeah, so I'm most active on my Instagram, which my handle is at the Cyclic Sorceress. It'll be in the show notes, I'm pretty sure you said. And my website, where all my offerings are and a little bit more about me, is www.troveofthesacred.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, Giselle. And Ashley, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, perhaps our economic change person will reach out to you or me. How would they get in touch with you, Ashley?
So Facebook is where I'm usually the most active, but I also have Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Wild Creatrix. And then on Facebook, I have Wild Creatrix Studio because I'm also an artist, and that's my platform I use to put different things out there. And then I have my Facebook page, my personal page. If people want to get a hold of me on there, they're welcome to as well.
Okay, wonderful. And I can attest to Ashley writes some very thought-provoking posts on her personal page, doing a lot of really interesting research into all different kinds of beautiful areas of discussion. So hence our conversation about getting on here. So I'm really glad that we got to come together today. And thank you so much, Giselle, for joining us today. And listeners, yeah, listeners know that if you want to learn more about the Womb Centered Healing Temple, which is the online collaborative space that I have created, I felt called to create to bring together womb-centered healing practitioners of, personal and professional practitioners in a community to support each other. You can go to wombcenteredhealing.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter there. You'll get notification emails about new podcast episodes, about new blog posts. And it's not just me writing the blog. There's various practitioners that contribute to the blog, and of course courses and events that are happening in the Womb Centered Healing Temple. So check it out. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll also get a free MP3 meditation, a womb listening meditation to connect with your own womb wisdom. So wonderful to be here with you all today. That's all for now. Until next time.